I never thought I'd be writing this down, but here I am, 8 months after everything fell apart, still trying to make sense of it all. My name is David, and this is the story of how I discovered my wife Sarah's affair with our neighbor Tom, and how it destroyed more than just 2 marriages. This is also the story of how I learned that sometimes the most devastating betrayals are the ones that mean absolutely nothing to the people who commit them. Sarah and I had been married for 12 years when it all began to unravel. We met in college, both studying education, though I switched to accounting in my junior year when I realized I wasn't cut out for dealing with other people's children all day. Sarah, however, was a natural teacher. She had this way with kids that made even the most difficult ones settle down and listen to her. We weren't the passionate couple we once were, but I thought we were solid. We had our routines, our comfortable silences, our shared responsibilities. We owned a modest 2-story house in Maplewood, a suburban development that had been built in the late 90s. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names and borrowed cups of sugar from each other. Or so I thought. I worked as a senior accountant at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized firm that handled mostly small business accounts. The work was steady, if not particularly exciting, and it paid well enough for us to live comfortably. Sarah taught kindergarten at Oakdale Elementary, about 15 minutes from our house. She loved her job even when it exhausted her, which it often did. 24 5-year-olds can drain anyone's energy by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Our neighborhood was the kind of place real estate agents described as family-friendly. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, the occasional block party or 4th of July barbecue. Most of our neighbors were couples like us, middle-aged, middle-class, settling into the comfortable rhythms of suburban life. There were the Hendersons next door, both retired teachers who spent their days gardening and their evenings watching old movies. The Patels across the street had 2 teenage daughters who babysat for the younger families. The Johnsons at the corner had just had their 3rd child and were always looking slightly overwhelmed but happy. And then there was Tom Richardson. Tom lived 3 houses down with his wife Jessica and their twin boys Marcus and Michael, who were 8 years old. He was a contractor who specialized in home renovations, and his own house was a testament to his skills. He was always working on some project, refinishing the deck, updating the landscaping, installing new windows. His yard was immaculate, his driveway was always pressure washed, and his truck was newer and shinier than most of the cars on our street. Tom was the kind of man other men either admired or resented, depending on their own level of security. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of build that came from actual physical labor rather than gym workouts. His hands were always slightly stained with wood stain or paint, and he had a way of making every home improvement project look effortless. I'll admit I felt a bit inadequate around him. While he was installing custom built-ins in his living room, I was calling professionals to fix a leaky faucet. Jessica worked as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital, often pulling night shifts that left her exhausted during the day. She was a small, quiet woman with prematurely gray hair that she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail. I rarely saw her without scrubs or workout clothes, and she always looked like she was running late for something. The few times we had talked at neighborhood gatherings, she seemed nice enough but distracted, the way people get when they're juggling too many responsibilities. The Richardson boys were energetic kids who spent most afternoons riding their bikes up and down the street or playing basketball in their driveway. Tom coached their little league team and took them camping on weekends when Jessica was working. From the outside, they looked like the perfect all-American family. Tom and I occasionally chatted over the fence about sports or lawn care, nothing more. He was friendly enough but not overly warm. There was something about him that kept people at a distance, not unfriendly exactly but self-contained. He seemed like the kind of man who didn't need much from other people, who was comfortable handling whatever life threw at him without asking for help. Our wives were cordial but not particularly close friends. Sarah always said Jessica seemed nice but tired, and Jessica probably thought the same about Sarah. They would wave to each other when they got the mail or were working in their yards, exchange pleasantries about the weather or the neighborhood association's latest newsletter, but that was about it. Looking back now, I realize how little I actually knew about any of these people I saw every day. We all maintained our polite suburban facades, keeping our real selves hidden behind well-trimmed hedges and careful small talk. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening in March. I remember the date exactly, March 15th, because it was the day after the big snowstorm that had shut down half the city. I had been dealing with a splitting headache all day, probably from staring at spreadsheets for 10 hours straight while trying to prepare for tax season. My boss had finally told me to go home early, which was unusual because Morrison & Associates prided itself on its dedication to client service, especially during busy season. I arrived home around 3:30, expecting to find the house empty since Sarah's school day didn't end until 4. But her silver Honda Civic was in the driveway, parked at an odd angle as if she had been in a hurry. I called her name as I walked through the front door but got no answer. Her purse was on the kitchen counter next to the mail, which she had apparently already sorted. Her phone was plugged in and charging next to the coffee maker, which was strange because Sarah was practically attached to that phone during the school year. Parents and administrators were constantly calling or texting with questions or updates. I checked the living room, the basement, even our bedroom upstairs. No Sarah. I looked out the back window to see if she was in the garden, but the yard was empty except for the patches of dirty snow left over from yesterday's storm. I was starting to worry that something had happened to her. Maybe she had gotten sick and walked to urgent care, or perhaps there had been a family emergency. But then I remembered her phone was still here and Sarah never went anywhere without her phone. She returned about an hour and 15 minutes later, coming through the front door with slightly wind-blown hair and cheeks flushed from the cold. She seemed startled to see me standing in the kitchen. "David? What are you doing home so early?" "Headache," I said, studying her face. "Where were you?" "I was worried." "Oh," she said, avoiding my eyes as she hung up her coat. "I was helping Mrs. Peterson with her groceries. Poor thing was struggling with those heavy bags, and you know how icy the sidewalks still are." It sounded reasonable enough, but something about her tone bothered me. Sarah was usually a good liar when she needed to be. We all are when it comes to protecting people's feelings or avoiding unnecessary drama. But this felt different. Less smooth. "That was nice of you," I said. "How is she doing? I haven't seen her around lately." "Oh, fine. Just getting older, you know how it is." But Mrs. Peterson wasn't fine, and she wasn't getting older in her own house. She was visiting her daughter in Florida. I had seen her leave the week before, loading suitcases into her daughter's car while complaining loudly about how cold it was and how she couldn't wait to feel some real sunshine on her face. I didn't say anything to Sarah about the lie. Maybe I had been mistaken about when Mrs. Peterson left. Maybe she had come back early. Maybe Sarah had been helping someone else and just mixed up the names. People do that kind of thing all the time. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing other small things that didn't quite add up. Sarah began showering immediately after coming home from work, which she had never done before in all our years of marriage. She used to complain about how tired she was at the end of the school day, how she just wanted to change into comfortable clothes and collapse on the couch for a few minutes before starting dinner. Now she would walk straight upstairs without even saying hello properly, and I would hear the water running within minutes of her arrival. She also became protective of her phone in a way that seemed excessive even by modern standards. She had always been on her phone a lot during the school year. It came with the territory of being a teacher, but now she took it everywhere. To the bathroom, to the basement when she was doing laundry, even to bed, where she would keep it on her nightstand instead of charging it in the kitchen like she always had before. When I commented on it one evening, asking if everything was okay at school because she seemed to be getting more calls and messages than usual, she laughed it off. You know how parents are these days. They think teachers are available 24/7. Mrs. Chun has texted me 6 times today about Emma's reading level. But when her phone buzzed during dinner that same evening, she glanced at it and immediately turned it face down without responding, which wasn't like her at all. Sarah was conscientious about responding to parents promptly, even when it annoyed her. She also started working late more often, claiming parent conferences or school events that somehow never appeared on the school calendar she usually shared with me. Sarah had always been good about keeping me informed about her schedule, partly because we tried to coordinate our evening plans and partly because she knew I liked to have dinner ready when she got home on her normal days. Now she would call at 4:30 or 5 o'clock to say she would be late, that there was an unexpected meeting or a parent who needed to talk. The first few times I just reheated whatever I had made for dinner. But after it happened 5 times in 2 weeks, I started ordering takeout instead, which felt like a small defeat in the routine we had built over 12 years of marriage. The strangest thing was how these changes in Sarah seemed to coincide with changes in the neighborhood dynamic I couldn't quite put my finger on. Tom Richardson seemed to be around his house less during the day, even though spring was typically his busiest season for outdoor projects. His truck would be gone for longer stretches than usual, and when I did see him, he seemed distracted, less likely to stop and chat when we encountered each other getting mail or taking out trash. Jessica also seemed more stressed than usual if that was possible. The few times I saw her during the day, usually when she was leaving for work or coming home from grocery shopping, she looked even more exhausted than usual. Her scrubs were often wrinkled, and she had developed a habit of talking to herself under her breath as she walked from her car to her front door. The Richardson boys started spending more time at other friends' houses after school, which was unusual because they had always preferred playing in their own yard where Tom could keep an eye on them while he worked on his various projects. I told myself I was being paranoid, looking for patterns where none existed. Marriage is like that sometimes. You start noticing every small change in routine, every minor shift in behavior, and you can convince yourself that something significant is happening when really it's just the normal ebb and flow of daily life. But then came the Thursday afternoon in April that changed everything. I had been dealing with a particularly difficult client all week, a small restaurant owner who couldn't understand why his quarterly taxes were so high and kept demanding that I find creative ways to reduce his burden. After 3 days of trying to explain basic tax law to someone who didn't want to hear it, I decided to surprise Sarah with lunch at her school. We hadn't been spending much quality time together lately, and I thought it might be nice to break up both of our days with something spontaneous. I stopped at her favorite sandwich shop and picked up 2 turkey clubs with extra bacon, the way she liked them, along with a couple of sodas and a bag of the kettle chips she was always buying but never admitting she ate. The secretary at Oakdale Elementary, Mrs. Rodriguez, looked confused when I walked into the main office carrying the bag of food and asking if I could surprise my wife with lunch. "Oh, Mr. Stevens, I'm sorry, but Sarah left early today. There was a family emergency." My heart immediately jumped to the worst-case scenarios. Sarah's parents lived about an hour away, and her father had been having some health issues lately. Her sister lived across the country and we hadn't heard from her in a few weeks, which wasn't unusual but now seemed ominous. "Is everything okay? What kind of emergency?" Mrs. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. She didn't give me details, just said it was urgent and asked me to get coverage for her afternoon classes. She left around noon. I thanked Mrs. Rodriguez and walked back to my car, trying not to panic. I called Sarah's phone immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again 5 minutes later with the same result. I decided to drive home, thinking maybe Sarah was there dealing with whatever crisis had come up. Maybe her parents were on their way to our house, or maybe she was on the phone with her sister trying to figure out how to handle some situation from 3,000 miles away. But when I got home, Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway. The house was empty and quiet, exactly as I had left it that morning. Her phone charger was still plugged in next to the coffee maker, which meant she had taken her phone with her, so why wasn't she answering? I tried calling her parents' house but no one answered. I tried her sister's number in Portland but got voicemail there too. I was starting to feel genuinely worried when I remembered that Sarah's parents sometimes turned their phone off during the day, and her sister worked weird hours as a freelance graphic designer. I decided to drive around the neighborhood, thinking maybe Sarah was at one of the neighbors' houses dealing with whatever emergency had come up. Maybe Mrs. Henderson had fallen, or maybe the Patels needed help with something urgent. That's when I took the back road that runs behind the community center, a route I sometimes used as a shortcut when traffic was bad on the main streets. It's not a road most people know about unless they live in the neighborhood, and it's partially hidden by a line of mature oak trees that the developers left standing when they built the community center 15 years ago. Tom's work truck was parked there, backed up against the trees where it wouldn't be visible from the community center's parking lot or from most of the surrounding streets. And next to it, parked in the same careful way, was Sarah's silver Honda Civic. I pulled over and sat in my car, engine running, staring at the 2 vehicles and trying to come up with an innocent explanation. Maybe they were both volunteering for some community project I didn't know about. Maybe Tom was doing repair work at the community center and Sarah was helping him somehow, though that didn't explain why she had left school claiming a family emergency. Maybe there actually was some kind of emergency that involved both of them, a neighbor in trouble, a situation that required both a teacher's calm demeanor and a contractor's practical skills. I sat there for 25 minutes, watching the 2 cars and seeing no signs of life. The community center looked closed, no other cars in the main parking lot, no lights visible in the windows. There was no obvious construction project happening, no emergency vehicles, no indication of any legitimate reason for 2 married neighbors to be meeting in secret behind a building in the middle of a Thursday afternoon. Finally, I saw movement. The community center had a back exit that I hadn't noticed before, partially obscured by a dumpster and some overgrown bushes. Tom emerged first, looking carefully in both directions before walking quickly to his truck. He wasn't carrying any tools or materials that would suggest he had been doing work inside the building. Sarah came out about 2 minutes later, also looking around cautiously before hurrying to her car. They didn't acknowledge each other, didn't wave goodbye, didn't even make eye contact as far as I could tell from my position across the street. But their body language told a story that made my stomach clench with a mixture of anger and nausea. This wasn't the body language of 2 people who had been dealing with an emergency together, or working on a community project. or handling any kind of legitimate business. Sarah's hair was slightly disheveled, and she kept smoothing it down as she walked to her car. Tom moved with the careful, deliberate steps of someone trying very hard to look casual. They both got into their cars quickly and drove away in different directions without looking back. I followed Sarah home from a distance, my mind racing through possibilities and explanations and a growing certainty that none of the innocent scenarios I was trying to construct made any sense. Sarah arrived home about 5 minutes before I did, just enough time to compose herself and create whatever story she was going to tell me about her day. When I walked through the front door, I could hear the shower running upstairs. "Sarah?" I called out. "I'll be down in a minute," she called back, her voice sounding determinedly normal. "How was your day?" "Fine," I managed to say, hanging up my coat and trying to decide what to do with the bag of sandwiches I was still carrying. "How was yours?" "Oh, the usual chaos with the kids. Mrs. Chin kept Emma home again, and we had that fire drill that completely disrupted the afternoon reading groups." She was lying. Not just about where she had been but about her entire day. She hadn't been at school to deal with Mrs. Chen or fire drills. She had been in some back room of the community center with Tom Richardson, doing things I didn't want to think about. When she came downstairs 15 minutes later, she was wearing different clothes than she had worn to school that morning. Her hair was still slightly damp from the shower, and she smelled like our expensive body wash instead of the cheap hand soap they used at the elementary school. "You're home early again," she said, kissing my cheek in a way that felt performative. "Another headache? I thought I'd surprise you with lunch, but Mrs. Rodriguez said you had left for a family emergency. Is everything okay? Are your parents all right?" For just a moment, I saw panic flicker across her face. Then she recovered, but not quickly enough. "Oh, that false alarm. Mom called in a panic because she thought Dad was having chest pains, but it turned out to be indigestion. You know how she gets." I tried calling them, but no one answered. They probably went out to run errands after the whole drama was over. You know how they are, crisis 1 minute, grocery shopping the next. It was plausible enough, but I knew it wasn't true. I could tell by the way she was avoiding my eyes, by the slight tremor in her voice, by the fact that she was fidgeting with her wedding ring the way she always did when she was nervous about something. "I'm glad they're okay," I said, and left it at that. For the next week, I found myself paying attention to things I had never noticed before. I started taking mental notes of Sarah's schedule, of when Tom's truck was and wasn't in his driveway, of the patterns of movement in our quiet suburban neighborhood. What I discovered was that Sarah's late work days coincided almost perfectly with Jessica's night shifts at the hospital. I could see Jessica leaving for work around 6:30 in the evening, her nursing bag slung over her shoulder, looking as tired and stressed as always. And on those same evenings, Sarah would call me around 5 o'clock to say she was staying late at school for parent conferences or faculty meetings that never seemed to appear on any official calendar. Tom would disappear from his usual yard work around the same time Sarah claimed to be staying late at school. His truck would be gone from the driveway by 4:30 or 5, returning sometime after 8 when Sarah would finally come home with stories about demanding parents or administrative meetings. I began taking different routes home from work, driving past places where two people might meet if they wanted to avoid being seen by their neighbors. I found them twice more over the course of that week. Once in the parking lot behind the old Kmart that had been closed for years, once in a residential area about 10 minutes from our neighborhood where new houses were being built but most of the lots were still empty. Each time, I watched from a distance as they arrived separately, disappeared into some private space, and emerged later with that same cold, businesslike demeanor. No lingering goodbyes, no stolen kisses in the parking lot, no signs of any emotional connection whatsoever. The strangest part was how they acted around each other in public. At the neighborhood barbecue that weekend, hosted by the Johnsons to celebrate their new baby, Tom and Sarah barely acknowledged each other's existence. When Tom was manning the grill, Sarah made a point of staying on the other side of the yard. When Sarah was helping with the salads in the kitchen, Tom found reasons to be outside checking on the food. When they did interact, passing each other while getting drinks, or when someone else's conversation required both of their participation, there was an edge to their voices that seemed like genuine dislike rather than people trying to hide an attraction. I watched Jessica that night too, looking for signs that she suspected anything. But she seemed oblivious, focused on keeping track of Marcus and Michael while juggling her own plate of food and trying to make polite conversation with the other wives. She looked exhausted, the way she always did, and grateful to be socializing with adults instead of dealing with whatever drama she encountered during her shifts at the hospital. Tom, for his part, was attentive to Jessica in a way that seemed genuine rather than performative. He made sure she had enough to eat, took over kid-watching duties when she wanted to sit down for a few minutes, brought her a sweater when the evening air got cool. He didn't act like a man who was cheating on his wife. He acted like a man who cared about his wife's comfort and well-being, which made the whole situation even more confusing and infuriating. I couldn't understand what I was witnessing. This wasn't the behavior of lovers swept away by passion, sneaking moments together whenever they could manage it. This wasn't even the behavior of people who particularly liked each other. If anything, Tom and Sarah seemed to actively dislike each other when they were forced to interact in public. So what the hell were they doing together in empty parking lots and abandoned buildings every week? The answer came to me gradually, over the course of several sleepless nights when I lay in bed next to my wife trying to figure out what was happening to my marriage. They were using each other. Sarah was getting something from these encounters with Tom, maybe the thrill of breaking rules, maybe revenge for some real or imagined slight from me, maybe just the temporary excitement of having a secret. But she wasn't getting emotional fulfillment, and she certainly wasn't getting romance. Tom was using Sarah for his own reasons. Maybe Jessica's demanding work schedule left him feeling neglected. Maybe he enjoyed the power that came with seducing a neighbor's wife. Maybe he just wanted physical gratification without any of the emotional complications that came with actual relationships. But they didn't love each other. They might not have even liked each other very much. They were meeting regularly to use each other for something, then going back to their normal lives where they could barely stand to be in the same room together. The realization made everything worse somehow. If Sarah had fallen in love with someone else, at least there would have been genuine emotion behind her betrayal, some human feeling I could understand even if I couldn't forgive it. People fall in love with the wrong person all the time. It's tragic and destructive, but it's also fundamentally human. But this was cold and calculating. Sarah was risking 12 years of marriage for something that meant nothing to her emotionally, something that didn't even bring her joy or fulfillment. She was destroying our life together for empty physical encounters with a man she didn't particularly like, in parking lots and empty buildings, probably talking about how unhappy they were with their spouses while they satisfied whatever mutual need had brought them together. I started paying attention to Sarah at home in a way I hadn't for years, looking for signs of guilt or regret or even satisfaction. What I saw was a woman who seemed increasingly irritated with everything. With me, with her job, with the house, with our neighborhood, with the routine we had built together over more than a decade. She snapped at me more often over small things, leaving dishes in the sink, forgetting to pick up milk at the store, asking what she wanted for dinner. She seemed restless and dissatisfied in a way that had nothing to do with passion or excitement and everything to do with someone who had made choices that weren't bringing her whatever she thought she wanted. At the same time, I noticed that Tom seemed increasingly short-tempered at home as well. I could hear him yelling at Marcus and Michael more often when they were playing outside, his voice carrying across the yard in a way that made Jessica come hurrying out of the house to see what was wrong. He snapped at Jessica when she asked him to help with household tasks, something I had never witnessed before in all the years we had been neighbors. Whatever Tom and Sarah were doing together, it wasn't making either of them happier. If anything, it seemed to be poisoning their attitudes toward their actual families, the people they were supposed to love and care about. I finally confronted Sarah on a rainy Saturday morning in May, exactly 2 months after I had first seen them together behind the community center. I had been awake most of the night, lying next to her and listening to her breathe, trying to figure out what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. Part of me wanted to yell and accuse and demand explanations. Part of me wanted to pretend I had never seen anything, to try to go back to our comfortable routines and ignore what was happening. But I couldn't keep living with the knowledge and the anger and the complete bewilderment at what my wife had become. Sarah was sitting at our kitchen table, still in her pajamas, drinking coffee and scrolling through her phone. It was 8:30 in the morning, and the house was quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows. "Sarah," I said, sitting down across from her, "is there something you need to tell me about your relationship with Tom Richardson?" The color drained from her face so quickly that for a moment I was worried she might actually faint. Her coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips, and I watched her hand begin to tremble slightly. She didn't deny it immediately, which somehow made everything more real and final than it had been during the 2 months I had been gathering evidence and trying to convince myself I was wrong. Instead, she set down her coffee mug carefully and began to cry. Not the tears of someone who had been caught doing something they loved and didn't want to give up, but the tears of someone who had been caught doing something they never really wanted to be doing in the first place. "It didn't mean anything," she said through her tears, which was exactly what I had suspected and exactly what I didn't want to hear. "Then why?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded when everything inside me was screaming. She couldn't give me a real answer. She talked about feeling trapped, about wanting to feel wanted, about Tom making her feel different than she felt at home. She talked about how boring our life had become, how predictable and safe and ordinary everything was. But when I pressed her about whether she cared about Tom, whether there were feelings involved that I needed to understand, she shook her head. "I don't even like him that much," she admitted, which was somehow more devastating than if she had declared her undying love for him. "Then why continue? Why risk everything we've built together for someone you don't even like?" "I don't know," she said, and I believed her. "I don't know why I started, and I don't know why I kept going. It just became this thing that was happening and I couldn't figure out how to stop it." "What do you mean you couldn't figure out how to stop it?" Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked out the kitchen window at Tom's house, visible through the rain. "It started by accident," she said quietly. "Back in February. I was at the community center after school, using their Wi-Fi because ours was down and I had to submit some paperwork online. Tom was there working on some repair job they had hired him for. We started talking, just normal neighbor conversation, but then he said something about how Jessica was always working and never had time for him anymore, and I said something about how you and I barely talked about anything except logistics." She paused, still staring out the window. One thing led to another. It was stupid and impulsive, and afterward we both agreed it was a mistake and would never happen again. But then Jessica picked up more shifts at the hospital, and you started working late more often during tax season, and we kept running into each other in places where no one else was around. "For 2 months, I said. "For 2 months, she agreed. "Maybe longer. I lost track." "And you never enjoyed it? Never felt anything for him?" Sarah looked at me directly for the first time since our conversation had started. "David, I felt guilty every single time. Before, during, and after. Tom isn't a particularly nice person. He's selfish and demanding and he complains constantly about Jessica and his kids. Half the time we were together, he was telling me how much better I was than his wife, and the other half he was criticizing me for not being available when he wanted me to be. So why not stop? Because stopping would have meant admitting that I had been doing something horrible for no good reason. At least while it was happening, I could tell myself that there was some reason for it, some need it was filling or some problem it was solving. But there wasn't. It was just this destructive thing that had taken on a life of its own. I sat there trying to process what she was telling me. My wife had been cheating on me for months with a man she didn't like, in a relationship that brought her no joy, for reasons she couldn't explain or defend. "Have you told him it's over?" "I told him yesterday that you were getting suspicious and we needed to stop." He seemed relieved, if I'm being honest. I think he was as tired of it as I was. "Jessica doesn't know?" "Not as far as I know. Tom was always paranoid about her finding out, more worried than I was about you finding out." I wanted to ask more questions. Where they had gone, what they had done, how they had justified it to themselves week after week. But I also realized that I didn't actually want to know the details. The details wouldn't help me understand what had happened to my marriage, and they certainly wouldn't help me figure out what to do next. "Do you want to try to work this out?" I asked. Sarah was quiet for a long time, still looking out the window at the rain and Tom's perfect house with its perfect landscaping and its completely dysfunctional family. "I don't know if I know how to want anything anymore," she said finally. "I've been making decisions for months that don't make any sense, destroying things that mattered to me for things that didn't matter at all. I don't trust myself to know what I want." "But do you want to try?" "Yes," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "I think so. If you're willing to try." I was willing to try, or at least I thought I was. We made an appointment with a marriage counselor for the following week. Sarah ended her relationship with Tom immediately, and we both committed to being honest with each other about what had gone wrong and what we needed to do to fix it. Dr. Patricia Hernandez was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who specialized in helping couples recover from infidelity. Her office was decorated with plants and comfortable furniture that was probably supposed to make people feel safe and relaxed. It mostly made me feel like I was in a therapist's office dealing with problems I never thought I would have. Infidelity is often a symptom of underlying issues in a relationship, Dr. Hernandez explained during our first session. Rather than focusing on the affair itself, we want to understand what needs weren't being met and how both partners contributed to the circumstances that made the affair possible. Sarah talked about feeling taken for granted, about how our relationship had fallen into patterns that left her feeling invisible and unimportant. She talked about how I worked late during tax season and seemed more interested in spreadsheets than in spending time with her. She talked about how we had stopped really talking to each other about anything meaningful, how our conversations had become limited to household logistics and social obligations. I talked about how I had thought we were happy, how I had interpreted our comfortable routines as evidence of a stable, mature relationship rather than signs of neglect. I talked about how I had assumed Sarah was content with our life because she had never told me she wasn't. I talked about how I had no idea she was feeling lonely or unappreciated because I had stopped paying attention to her emotional needs. Dr. Hernandez asked good questions and gave us exercises to do at home, communication techniques, ways to reconnect emotionally, strategies for rebuilding trust and intimacy. We tried. For 6 weeks we tried. We had scheduled conversations where we practiced active listening and expressing our needs directly. We went on date nights where we were supposed to focus on each other instead of our phones or our work or our household responsibilities. We read articles about recovering from infidelity and did worksheets about rebuilding intimacy after betrayal. But I couldn't get past the fundamental senselessness of what Sarah had done. I could understand someone cheating because they had fallen in love with someone else, or because they were desperately unhappy in their marriage, or because they were going through some kind of personal crisis that made them act irrationally. But Sarah had risked 12 years of marriage for a few months of joyless encounters with a man she actively disliked, for reasons she couldn't explain even to herself. She had chosen to destroy something real and meaningful for something empty and destructive. Every time I looked at her across the dinner table or lying next to me in bed, I found myself wondering what else she might be capable of doing for no good reason. If she could betray our marriage for something that meant nothing to her, what else might she be willing to sacrifice for equally meaningless reasons? The trust wasn't just broken. It was revealed to have been based on assumptions about Sarah's character that had turned out to be completely wrong. I had thought I was married to someone who made decisions based on logic and values and genuine feelings. Instead, I was married to someone who could spend months engaged in behavior that made her miserable, that served no purpose, that destroyed the most important relationship in her life. During our 6th session with Dr. Hernandez, I finally admitted what I had been thinking but hadn't been able to say out loud. I don't think I can get past this, I said. Not because I can't forgive Sarah for cheating, but because I can't understand why she did it, and I can't trust someone whose decision-making process is completely incomprehensible to me. Sarah cried. Dr. Hernandez talked about how healing takes time and how trust can be rebuilt with commitment and effort from both partners. But I knew I was done trying. Tom and Jessica's marriage didn't survive either, though it took longer to fall apart than ours did. Jessica found out about the affair in June, about a month after Sarah and I had started counseling. Apparently, someone had seen Tom's truck parked in various suspicious locations around town and mentioned it to a friend who mentioned it to another friend who eventually mentioned it to Jessica's sister, who lived 2 towns over but worked at the same hospital. When Jessica confronted Tom, he denied it initially, but she had already started paying attention to his schedule and had noticed the same patterns I had noticed with Sarah. Jessica was a nurse. She was trained to observe details and piece together information that other people might miss. Unlike Sarah, Tom apparently tried to blame Jessica for his affair. According to what Sarah told me later, Tom claimed that Jessica's work schedule had made him feel abandoned, that her exhaustion after long shifts had made their marriage feel more like a business arrangement than a relationship. Jessica filed for divorce immediately. She took Marcus and Michael and moved back to her mother's house in another state, refusing to let Tom have any custody beyond supervised visits once a month. She had documented evidence of his absences during times when he should have been watching the boys, and she had testimony from neighbors about his increasingly short temper with the children. Tom sold the house in July, probably because he couldn't afford the mortgage payments without Jessica's nursing income. He moved away without saying goodbye to anyone in the neighborhood, leaving behind the perfectly manicured lawn and custom-built deck that had been his pride and joy. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Tom was having trouble finding steady work because word had gotten around about his affairs. Apparently, Sarah hadn't been his first extramarital relationship. Several clients had discovered that he had been meeting women during hours when he was supposed to be working on their home improvement projects, using their empty houses as meeting places when the homeowners were at work. The contractor community in our area was relatively small and tightly connected. Tom's reputation for reliability and quality work was ruined not just by his personal behavior, but by the revelation that he had been using his clients' homes for his affairs. No one wanted to hire someone who might bring that kind of drama into their personal space. Sarah and I separated in August, 3 months after our last counseling session. The decision came after a particularly difficult evening when I found myself analyzing every word she said, every expression on her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motivations. I realized that I was never going to be able to stop questioning her judgment, her honesty, her basic decision-making process. "I can't live like this," I told her as we sat in our living room, surrounded by 12 years of shared memories and accumulated possessions that suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Like what? She asked, though I think she already knew. Like I'm married to someone I don't understand and can't trust. Not because you might cheat again, but because I have no idea what you might do for reasons that make no sense to anyone, including you. Sarah didn't argue with me. I think she was as tired of trying to rebuild something that felt irreparably broken as I was. She moved in with her sister, who had divorced her own husband 2 years earlier and was living alone in a 3-bedroom house about 40 minutes away. Sarah took a job at a different school district, starting fresh in a place where no one knew about her affair or her failed marriage. The divorce process was surprisingly civil, probably because both of us just wanted it to be over. We had no children, and our assets were straightforward enough that we didn't need to involve lawyers beyond the paperwork. Sarah took her personal belongings, half of our savings, and her car. I kept the house and everything else. By Christmas, the divorce was final. I spent the holidays alone in the house that had once felt like home but now felt like a museum of my former life. Sarah's absence wasn't the painful kind of missing someone you love. It was more like the relief you feel when a chronic headache finally goes away. I hadn't realized how much tension I had been carrying until it was gone. The neighborhood felt different too. The Richardsons' house sat empty for 3 months before a young family with small children moved in. The new neighbors were friendly and energetic, and their presence helped erase some of the awkwardness that had lingered after Tom's departure. Jessica never came back to collect the belongings that Tom had left behind when he moved. The new owners found boxes of her nursing textbooks and the boys' outgrown toys in the basement, along with family photos that no one had bothered to pack. Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door to the old Richardson place, eventually donated everything to charity rather than let it continue cluttering the basement. I tried online dating for a while, going through the motions of coffee dates and dinner conversations with women who seemed nice enough but who felt like strangers in a way that reminded me how long it takes to really know someone, and how wrong you can be even when you think you do. After 6 months of half-hearted attempts at dating, I gave up and focused on other things. I took up woodworking, using Tom's abandoned workshop techniques to build furniture for my now half-empty house. I started cooking more elaborate meals, partly because I had time and partly because eating alone felt less depressing when the food was actually good. I changed jobs too, leaving Morrison & Associates for a smaller firm that specialized in nonprofit accounting. The work was more meaningful even if it paid slightly less, and my new colleagues were the kind of people who talked about books and politics and travel instead of just complaining about their workloads and their clients. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Sarah at a grocery store in the mall. She was with a man I didn't recognize, tall, bearded, wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that suggested he had money but didn't need to prove it. They were shopping together with the comfortable familiarity of people who had been together for a while. Sarah introduced him as David, which made me wonder if she had a type or if it was just coincidence. He worked as a physical therapist and seemed genuinely nice, the kind of person who makes conversation easily and remembers details about people's lives. "How are you doing?" Sarah asked while David wandered off to find whatever was next on their shopping list. "Good," I said and meant it. "You look happy." She did look happy, in a way I didn't remember her looking during the last few years of our marriage. Relaxed and content rather than restless and dissatisfied. "I am happy," she said. "David is." She paused, looking for the right words. "He's straightforward. I always know where I stand with him, and he always knows where he stands with me. There's no guessing, no hidden agendas, no games." "That sounds nice," I said and realized I wasn't being sarcastic. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure David was still out of earshot. "For all of it. For what I did to our marriage, for what I put you through, for not being able to explain it better." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry too. For not paying attention to what you needed, for letting us get so comfortable that we stopped really seeing each other. Do you think we could have fixed it? If I hadn't screwed everything up?" I thought about it for a moment, watching David compare prices on different brands of olive oil with the kind of careful attention that suggested he was someone who made thoughtful decisions about small things. "Maybe," I said. "But I think we were both trying to make a relationship work with people we had outgrown. Maybe the affair was just the thing that forced us to admit we weren't right for each other anymore." "Maybe," she agreed. "I hope you find someone who makes you happy. I hope David continues to make you happy." We said goodbye politely, and I finished my grocery shopping thinking about how strange it was that the conversation hadn't been more painful. Sarah felt like someone I used to know well, someone I had fond memories of, but not someone whose happiness or unhappiness was particularly connected to my own anymore. That night, I called my sister in Colorado, someone I had been meaning to talk to more often since the divorce. "How are you doing really?" she asked, cutting through the small talk in the way that only family members can get away with. "Better," I said. "Different but better. I think I'm finally starting to understand what happened." Which was? Sarah and I had built a life together, but somewhere along the way we stopped building a relationship. We were great roommates who shared expenses and social obligations, but we weren't really married anymore. The affair was just the symptom that forced us to notice the problem. And Tom? Tom was probably going through the same thing with Jessica. Two people in comfortable but empty marriages who found each other and used each other to feel something different, even if it wasn't particularly good. "Do you think you'll get married again?" I looked around my house, which I had slowly been making into a space that reflected who I was now rather than who Sarah and I had been together. The furniture I had built, the books I was reading, the paintings I had bought because I liked them rather than because they matched the decor we had chosen together. "Maybe," I said. "But not anytime soon. I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not half of a couple that wasn't working." That sounds healthy. It feels healthy. Hard sometimes, but healthy. 2 years later, I'm still single, still living in the same house, still working at the nonprofit accounting firm. I've traveled more in the past 2 years than Sarah and I traveled in the last 5 years of our marriage. I've read books she would have found boring, tried restaurants she would have considered too expensive or too adventurous, gone to concerts and movies that interested me without worrying about whether they would interest anyone else. I've also learned to be comfortable with solitude in a way I never was during my marriage. The house doesn't feel empty anymore, it feels peaceful. I can spend entire weekends working on projects or reading or just thinking without feeling like I should be entertaining someone else or managing someone else's emotional needs. I'm not opposed to finding another relationship, but I'm not actively looking for one either. I've realized that I spent most of my adult life either in a relationship or trying to get into one, without ever really learning how to be content on my own. The affair taught me something important about the difference between love and habit, between genuine connection and comfortable routine. Sarah and I had stopped choosing each other years before she started sleeping with Tom. We were just going through the motions of being married without putting in the emotional work that actual marriage requires. Tom and Sarah's affair wasn't really about passion or love or even genuine dissatisfaction. It was about two people who had let their real lives become so empty and routine that they were willing to risk everything for a few hours a week of feeling something different, even if that something was guilt and confusion and mutual dislike. The tragedy wasn't that they destroyed two marriages. The tragedy was that they destroyed two marriages for something that brought them no real happiness or fulfillment. I think about that sometimes when I'm working in the garden or cooking dinner for one or reading in bed before going to sleep. How easy it is to let real life slip away while you're focused on maintaining the appearance of real life. How simple it would be to wake up one day and realize you've been living someone else's idea of what your life should look like instead of building the life you actually want. Sarah and I wasted years being married to the wrong people, each other. Tom and Jessica probably did the same thing. But at least now we all have the opportunity to start over, to figure out who we really are and what we really want, to build relationships based on genuine choice rather than habit and convenience. I don't know what happened to Tom. The last I heard, he had moved to another state and was working construction instead of running his own contracting business. Maybe he learned something from the experience, maybe he didn't. Maybe he's still using people for temporary relief from whatever emptiness he was trying to fill. Jessica remarried last year, according to Mrs. Henderson, who stays in touch with her through social media. Her new husband is also a nurse, someone she met at work who understands the demands of her schedule and shares her commitment to their profession. The boys are doing well in their new school, and Jessica seems to have built a life that works for who she actually is rather than who she thought she was supposed to be. As for me, I'm learning to be patient with the process of rebuilding a life that feels authentic rather than just acceptable. Some days are harder than others, but I wake up most mornings curious about what the day might bring rather than just trying to get through another day of routines that don't really mean anything. I'm not grateful for Sarah's affair, it was devastating and unnecessary and cruel. But I am grateful that it forced both of us to stop pretending that a marriage built on habit and convenience was the same thing as a marriage built on love and genuine partnership. Sometimes the most destructive thing that happens to you is also the thing that saves you from wasting the rest of your life on something that was never really working in the first place. Thank you for listening to my story. If you had a similar experience, share it in the comments. And also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.